So I've been reading through Genesis, and in Genesis 50, it sort of comes to the conclusion of the book of Genesis, but there's a particularly interesting story as Genesis treks through the life of Joseph. Joseph, as some of you know, was the favored of the sons of Israel, and Joseph basically had these dreams that made his brothers jealous. And so what Joseph then finds is that his brothers are not sharing love with him, not wanting to be with him, and eventually they stick him in a well, they sell him off to some traders from Egypt, and then he goes and gets sent into Potiphar's household. He gets elevated because God's favor is on him, but then he gets misunderstood as someone who is being seductive to Potiphar's wife. He gets thrown into jail again, and then ultimately Pharaoh finds out that he is a trustworthy guy, that he has the gift of interpreting dreams, and that he's also a very wise and a godly man with great integrity and great character. So then Pharaoh elevates Joseph in a particular time of need when there was a famine across the land of Egypt, 7 years of famine, and then 7 good years, and then 7 years of famine. And what we find ourselves at the end of the story, when there's reconciliation with Joseph and the brothers, and ultimately Joseph then has enough wealth and credibility in Pharaoh's house to bring his whole family to the courts and into the palace of Pharaoh. This is what happens in Genesis 50, is that when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, this is verse 15, they said, "It may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for the evil that we did to him." Obviously, they treated him poorly. They were so rude to him, and they sent him off, and they said to their father that he was dead and that he'd been taken by animals. So obviously, Joseph has every right to retaliate and not to love, trust, or provide for his family. And so then they went to Joseph saying, "Your father gave us this command before he died. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgressions of your brothers and their sin because they did evil to you." Obviously, they're trying to make this up because they're trying to look for a get out of jail free card. But the astonishing thing of this whole story is this, and we can find that in verse 19 and onwards. It says, "But Joseph said to them, 'Do not fear, am I in the place of God?'" And I just take that and I just realize that in the midst of difficult times where people are making very poor decisions, we cannot take the place of God and bring wrath and judgment on people. Joseph doesn't, and he had every right to. But then he goes on, "As for you, what you meant for evil against me, God meant it for good, to bring about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear, I will provide for you and your little ones." And thus he comforted them, and he spoke kindly to them. Joseph in this passage is a story of a godly man reflecting a godly character. And ultimately, this story doesn't end with Joseph, because Joseph points to a greater person, Jesus Christ, who was wrongly treated. He was favored by God, but the religious leaders of the day were jealous of him and the favor of God on his life, and they refused to believe he was God, and they treated him unjustly by crucifying him, by killing him, and that he would bear the punishment of our mistakes and sin. And yet when he is on the cross, the thing that Jesus says is, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And I think that is a truth that we hold on to, that whilst Jesus is the greater Joseph, He looks at us and says, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what we're doing. Because sometimes we do horrible things to each other, and we can take comfort in the words of Jesus that he is smiling on us and gracious towards us, not because of what we have done, but because of his grace towards us in dying in our place for our sin. May you be encouraged and have a great day as you continue to love Jesus in this season.